It has been a good day, and it has been a while. I think for the last 2 or 3 Fridays, as Pan-African Friday, we have not been coming to you for a number of reasons beyond our operation. I also know that there are a number of people who have been asking me about the disappearance. That's what the one said, the disappearance of Call, the disappearance of Uganda. Of course, also at one point disappeared. But there's been a lot of work that we have been involved in, but I can tell you we are now back, and we shall be back with you for now quite some time. I think we are going to be around this place. In the studio today on this Pan-African Friday, I'm having still your people, your own. I'm joined on this Friday by, you know, there is this issue of the naming. And I think Africans were very particular on the naming. And I would that we may, for this show, we'll maintain our real names that came from us. And for me, people who know me, of course, I'm Mututa, and that's my name. And I'm sure even the books of heaven, that I'm written Mututa. But I'm joined on this show by Ndugu Otuko. And also joined on the same show by Dada this time, because then I would say sister. But there is a sister, a Catholic sister, there is a sister, a nurse sister. So I'm joined by Dada Takali, all the way from Bugwere. Yes. Yeah. For the number of things that have happened, I think that since the last time we met here and we talked, and many people have been making a follow-up. A lot of responses have been very positive about the things that we have been discussing, especially in the African context, and they are very appreciative. Now, before we go far, I think let's recap a bit on how our week has been, and the few days that we have been together, we have not been together on this show, have been. I'll start with the Ndugu Otuko, because for him he has also disappeared for a long time, and I'm sure he has now a new appointment. I think we shall begin with that to tell us his newest achievement. Then he will tell us about how his week has been, and we'll continue from there. Ndugu Otuko.
Thank you very much, my brother, for inviting me to my favorite show, and talking about African issues and the African continent, how we can make it better. Indeed, the head of state, the commander-in-chief, has given me a new assignment, and that is to be a private secretary to him in charge of Office of the National Chairman, and that is the NRM office.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that is, so you are now the private secretary in charge of the chairman's office, yes. NRM chairman's office.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a title which is not very common, so I think we have to get used to it. That we have now a private secretary in charge of chairman's office. So, Ndugu Tuko, we'll just look at how the few days we have not been together have been, and how you have seen this week in the African context.
Thank you. A lot of things have happened for the period we've not been here, and most of them directly or indirectly have affected the African issues. In Africa, we've had the different activities happening, where the continent has been actively trying to brainstorm on how best we can make Africa a better place. I happened to participate in an IGAD meeting in Addis Ababa, where we are discussing issues to do with how to develop a framework paper, how we can be able to solve African problems as Africans, and be able to provide solutions to the conflicts that have existed in Africa for some time. But we have also seen other activities like the economic forums happening in South Africa, and so many other issues that are happening in Ghana. And these were all, you know, you find that these are all activities that are geared towards brainstorming and getting ideas that can be able to make Africa a better place.
Sure,
but we also saw African leaders being transported in a bus in the barrio, and it caused mixed reactions, and I believe maybe eventually we shall discuss about that, but it is something that raised eyebrows for many Pan-Africanists. Those who believe in African people and Africa as a continent. But also, of course, there were mixed reactions. There are those who are celebrating that we were treated that way. And we couldn't avoid that because many are still agents of or collaborators of the neo-colonialists, and it's something. Then lastly, I think in our absence here, was the suspension of the pipeline project by a European Parliament. That shows you how Africa must really have a lot to do in terms of dealing with the global world or the Western world, because they still look at us as inferior people. They can be able to sit in Europe and decide for African people on what project is good and bad. And the assessment about the environment is the one that takes precedence, and I think this indicates to us that going forward, Africa needs a new breed of leaders with the character of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, so that we can be able to stand on our own and be able to champion our projects for transformation.
Sure, I saw a lot of that happen, and I think there's a lot to talk, especially in the African context, when it looks to how someone can sit in their bedroom somewhere and take a decision that will affect the African people. And in most cases on our shows here, I've been telling people that for me, I have no problem with someone deciding so, and sometimes it happens. I have a problem on what happens when such a decision is taken as African people. Do we see many African people coming up to say, no, I think this is wrong? We shall have come to that, I think, when we are discussing. So, Tagali, how has been yours? Tagali.
Okay. The week has been quite eventful, and I think for me, I'll go directly to the most important issues of concern, as far as I'm concerned. Ndugu Otuko pointed out a number of disturbing trends, and I fear that these will pick up pace as we go. First, I think was, of course, the issue of going forward in relation to the new head of state in the UK. We know that the monarch is not directly in the day-to-day affairs of the state, but it depends on if that person wants to maintain the course of his late mother, who chose to what they call stay above politics. If this man goes deeper into the political happenings in England, we may be in for a few surprises, but that remains to be seen. The issue that has caused quite a bit of reaction in a number of quarters in relation to how some heads of state were moved about in a bus. But it was, in all fairness, it wasn't just African leaders. It's only that is where our focus was. But still, it was very clear that there are levels of respect. Top on the pile is, of course, the President Biden, who chose to come with his monstrous vehicle that we all know about. But this shows that what we have been saying all along is that if we don't shape up in terms of financial clout, no one will give us the respect that is due us. That is just how the world works. We know that China and Russia have been struggling, and yet they are further along economically. But unless they can account for themselves better financially, that respect will also not be that forthcoming. While we were still meditating on these very things, we heard about this situation with IPOD, and again, it is the same people who are overreaching themselves and dipping their hands directly in the affairs of this nation. But if we allow them to continue underwriting our causes, then we cannot expect any other reaction but to keep themselves in circulation even when we think they have overstayed their welcome. Those very people have also had the nerve to talk about an oil pipeline that is is really the decision of another entity, and that is the country of Uganda. But Tanzania has also angrily disputed that position. But in all fairness, we have said this repeatedly. If we remain on the sidelines of economic activity on the globe, these sorts of disrespectful speeches and so on can only pick pace. We thought we were over this sad chapter, but unfortunately, new political actors are reviving the political ghosts of the colonial era. In that way, it has not been a very good week, Mr. Matuta.
Well, a lot has been said, and I think as a country we're also now beyond the viruses that we have been having. Ebola also presents again itself, and already as a country we're affected. Of course, the number of infections have been recorded, but I think the health team has given all the assurance that the situation is under control, and I hope it will be controlled so that we can have a breather after COVID, because then that will force us into what previously we have been into. I know a number of countries have almost now declaring COVID-free of their countries, as Africa was still crippling, but I know we are not as bad off. I've been to some countries, when you put on a mask, people will think, are you sick? And the one was asking us, you still have COVID in your countries? So you feel you are the odd person out. But I hope that can happen soon, that we can no longer have masks or any fears for these diseases. Unfortunately, now Ebola comes to back to us, but I'm sure think the health team is doing all they can, and Uganda is known for its resilience when it comes to this, and will be able to overcome this one also. Members, we have talked about the issue of the bus. It reminds me of those days when you
are not the NRM one, right?
No. On those days when you are going back to school and you have to jump on a bus for the schools that had buses. Yes. Now, I looked at this photograph of heads of state sitting on a bus, and most of them really looked bad.
They could not believe it.
Exactly. But then you wonder, first of all, I mean, why did they find themselves on the bus? But most importantly, what happened for the people who did not go for that burial? Sometimes people say a lot of things, but I think also sometimes it's good to focus. For example, President Museveni didn't go for that burial. Of course, we had the Minister for Foreign Affairs who did attend that burial. And for me, it was very okay. At that level, even if you scale them down to a bus, you can tell us it was, which type of bus, by the way? It was, they were saying it was bulletproof, it was rose, and wherever it had all the best things that you can, including Wi-Fi. I laughed. So, but you also look at it from the other side. Why couldn't? Did you expect the Africans heads of state to have their vehicles there? Of course, they couldn't do like the Frenchman and the American who carried their limos into London. But at the same time, you then realize at that particular point that you are a person non grata. Much as you are attending this funeral, but your being there was so inconsequential that your not being there could have even been okay. So it's also very frustrating, but also very educating to the people of Africa. You know, we had a burial, one of our relatives died in the village, and we were at this burial, but there's this person who was disturbing, you know, people at night. Now, one of the boys told this guy, say, why can't you also wait when your person dies the other side that you attend? Why do you come and disturb us when ours die? So it is like the same saying that I'm seeing here. But You remember even at this same burial, some people were not allowed to attend. It was like a very beautiful party that if you didn't attend, you will have lost so much. But I think African leaders need also to take some lessons from them. That next time they will put them on something else. Thank God there was no border in London, because some people could have ended up on borders or something like that. But to me, that is not bad enough. The worst of it is, what do we achieve? Because you spend all that money to go to attend a burial, which burial you are not even welcome. That your being there is so inconsequential. It is good at that level to build relationships with within countries, especially at the Commonwealth. In fact, the members of the Commonwealth would have been given more priority in this than the otherwise. Now, when you look at that photograph on the screen, viewers, you really can, it tells you a story. From each face, you can see a very different story. So I think next time it is a learning process, and there's a learning area for the African leaders that we don't need. Of course, like Tagali said, it is not only African leaders, definitely, who were on that bus. There were many others. And the reasoning in London was that they tried as much as possible to reduce on traffic, to reduce on the number of cars that would attend or would be managed by security, which is understandable. But again, why on the bus? They could have had a better arrangement than putting them on the bus. What's your take, Tagali, on
that? We've been down this very road many times. I want to emphasize that you get what you pay for. The Americans like to say that. In this situation, I said the top of the heap in terms of respect is the US. I remember some years ago, and I think President Bush was the president at the time, and he was extended as a state visit to the UK. And as such, he was the personal guest, not personal, but the official guest of the Queen, who was still alive at the time. And I remember it making rounds, the outrage of the British people. Because when the American president came, not only did he come with his cars and entourage, and by the way, the people who accompany the US president can be hundreds of people.
I think our producers will be able to show you the convoy of the American president, even as was in London.
Once I saw a breakdown one time, and they talked about the cooks and the medics and the dressers. There are hundreds of people who we don't see. So when we see the convoy, there are hundreds of people who support the operation of a visit of a US president. But that aside, the room that he was assigned to sleep in Buckingham Palace, and that is where the Queen did her official business, was totally, fully, completely redone.
To the taste?
Not to the taste. To meet the security specifications of a US president. The UK people were so outraged. They said, look, this is the best security that the UK has to offer. If it's good enough for the Queen, they said, you don't understand. No one is looking to kill the Queen.
The Queen is innocent.
The Queen is, she's someone's grandmother. No one is looking to. But when it comes to the US president, there can be no compromises. Because someone is looking to harm this person. But what we are saying, that they gave their justification, they said we have to rewire to make sure he has secure communications, to make sure every gadget available to a US president is on hand.
For one day?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, he had maybe 2 days or so. What we're trying to say is that you buy this respect. The US, of course, is the greatest economy on earth, and arguably probably the greatest military power. So to gain that respect, you have to work at it, is really what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. The fact that you're president of Indonesia is not good enough. You're president of Iran is not good enough. What do you amount to in terms of sheer, what is your footprint on the globe in terms of economically, militarily, and so on and so forth? The day we understand that this thing is not personal, it is not a personal slight, it is just the way those people do what they do. There are people there are many European dignitaries, I'm sure, who are there.
Yes.
They were not allowed their own convoys. It's only, as you said, France, and there are a number of people. But there are reasons why that is so. So if you want respect, earn it.
Exactly.
And that's what we've been saying.
Well, these incidents actually have provoked the historical spirit of the African people. When all this was happening in UK, it came out clear in West Africa, South Africa, and here in East Africa, that the debate about African people is still alive. And a lot of mockery was made about the African presidents or heads of state that demeaned themselves by struggling to attend a ceremony of the colonial masters, the people who seek to suppress us, to continue suppressing us for their own benefit.
Exactly.
And I think when you look at the way African people, African leaders are still being looked at by the West, it is not different from the 1920s, the 1950s. We are still the same people. Mm-hmm. They are still the same thinking. It's the same narrative. It's the same template that is being played. The only thing is that the tactics may have changed, but the strategy is the same, that we must continue demeaning Africa. And you can't tell me you allow a head of state of one country to have vehicles more than 30 in his convoy, and you're saying an African cannot even be escorted by 2 vehicles. I think that's quite unfairness by the Western countries. But it also communicates to us as Africa, exactly, where we belong as African people. So as my sister Takali is talking about, is saying, that we must work for what we want to be treated to. And as African people, the first thing that we must struggle to improve is our economy. We must be able to brainstorm and work out methodologies and strategies on how Africa can be interdependent. How do we depend on Tanzania and how do we depend on Uganda? And how does East Africa depend on the West African countries? And I think the late Muammar Gaddafi had brought a very good concept. We must study his concept. How was he able to lend money to African Union? How was he able to donate money to African Union? That's a small country. But we must be able to get into the mindset of Muammar Gaddafi and say, what gave him the audacity, the strength, to have the ability to raise this money within Africa without going to Europe, but is able to support African countries. We know what Muammar Gaddafi was doing to Ugandan economy. He was able to inject lots of money to the Ugandan economy. This money was not coming from Europe. It was coming from Africa. So I think this, the death of the Queen should actually revive the thinking and the debate among African people, how best we can be able to strengthen ourselves so that we cannot be treated like students in a bus. But also in the barrier, you could realize that there is one aspect that came out clearly, the display of culture, the regalia and the traditional methodologies they have as the UK people. But the same people are telling us abandon culture. They're telling us we must abandon our traditional practices. And yet, in whatever we saw during the burial, in everything, you could see the display of the traditional culture of the UK people. So why are they telling us to abandon culture and adopt the Western methodologies of life? The reason is one. The Western world believes and they are aware that the stronger the culture of the people, the stronger the people become. So the aspect they must first do is to attack our culture so that we can be able to abandon it while they maintain theirs, so that we can be in disarray. There is nothing that unites us. We destroy our own traditional values so that we can be able to worship them. So I think there is a lot that we must do as African people. If we want to be treated well, we must work for it, and it begins with the issues of dealing with the economy. After dealing with the economy, we must talk about the security and the stability of African people. The security and the stability of African people is a threat to the existence of the West, because going forward in the years to come, without Africa, the West cannot survive. So therefore, they must be able to ensure that they destroy our culture, they destroy our values, and be able to cause instability so that they can continue suppressing us and colonizing us.
Talking of which, the culture, a part of it, we saw a lot of display, indeed, from the time the Queen died to the time she was buried. And you could see a number of things happening, like they have been rehearsed to the dot, that the Queen will die, and this will happen, and this will happen. And it was so thorough, and I liked that, because I think there was no this kind of confusion that we see normally during burials of dignitaries, especially in Africa. But talk about the Queen herself in relation to the African culture. Because we have seen this woman grow, so far, she's the longest serving monarch in that kingdom. Of course, there have been other kingdoms who have had long-serving leaders, but for her, she has been the longest-serving monarch in that kingdom. Do you have a take on that, Mama Tagali?
Yes, and I think one of the positives that the Queen was able to practice over the years was that she was, I think, an excellent reader of people. And she had an understanding of human beings that is a rare feat for most of us. One of the things she perfected earlier on in life was practicing a sort of neutrality. So much so that over her 70 years, most of her opinions on most things are not known. That is very difficult to do if you're in the public glare for all those years.
Mm-hmm.
There are many generalities that are known. She would prefer this over this, but the particulars, as in she doesn't get along with that particular leader, that didn't happen. She kept many of these things to herself, and that, I think, is one of the reasons why she has endured in a favorable light in most circles. And I think one of the reasons why many people actually made it a point to go there, I think, is really to pay homage to what this particular individual represented, as opposed to the superiority of these people, as opposed to the fact that they are better human beings. I think it was very much about what this particular human being was about. And that is the reason why many people, for example, across the races, across the religions, across regions, continue to esteem the late Mandela. You know, there's a place that human beings can get to where they inspire the best in all, wherever they may be. It's a very, very difficult and rare feat. That is why there are very few people who generally are seen favorably by most people. So the Queen was one such person. But that also talks about a person who had spent a lot of time in personal reflection. You don't just get there. This particular individual, she was deeply religious, by the way.
Yes, that's true.
And it is a very spiritual trait to be that way. When we talk about the Mother Teresas of this world, when we talk about people that we can agree were good people, the Gandhis of this world, these are people who have spent time to better themselves, not just in financial terms. They're not superficial people. The Queen, by virtue of her birth, by virtue of the region in which she was born, was privileged even before she was born. She remained privileged and died privileged.
Yes.
But they also tell us she never carried money once in her life. She never carried cash. Interesting. And I think for her, it was...
Why would you carry cash when everything is provided?
Well, you can carry cash out of habit. I'm not talking about a lot of it.
Yeah.
But many of our leaders, for example, have cash. It may not be a lot, but there's some cash. For whatever reason. Especially, you see, unlike that economy, the economies of Africa, because they are very much cash-based, you need cash. But the Queen, I'm thinking, it was also an extension of who she really was. This is a woman who refused to subject herself to the whims of material riches. I think as much as she tried very hard to be above the pool of basic human instincts, such as strife, such as being opinionated, she also, I think, strove to remain very much above the constraints that come with being unduly attached to the cares of this world. So I'm trying to answer your question. This Queen, she was an interesting human being. And I really want to return to the point that many of the people who were there were not there because this was Britain. They were there, I think, to remind themselves that they need to do better as human beings. Because many of our leaders have not been nice to their own people. Many of our leaders are not even good to themselves. Because when you do things that are painful and have terrible consequences to your people, you're also bringing it upon yourself.
You realize that the Queen herself was very humane. One of the reasons as to why maybe even these African people had to be abandoned on those buses was because of the personal relationship they had with Queen Elizabeth. Not because of the kingdom, not because of any other thing. And one thing which you did say about this woman, that she had this Christian-like background, because as a head of the Church of England, she embodied a lot in terms of the Christianity of that area. And of course, it's out of the same that you had the Church of Uganda, from the Church of England to the Church of Uganda. So there was that. But also, one thing also I liked about her is that she was this person who was a very good listener. Now, partly why that kingdom has survived was because of her own personality. She was and has died a very beautiful woman. I mean, without fear of contradictions. If you compared, even at her age, with a lady like, not because that I don't like her, and I'm sure many people don't like her, Camilla, for example, you would see a very big contrast.
But Camilla has never been beautiful, so.
No, that's not. So so
you don't have to struggle with words.
And so that attraction brought many people to like her, but also by implication like her kingdom. But it is also possible that her death could also be a disaster to the kingdom, unless something happens that the new king will be able to have the same values that the mother carried. And so that happened because you remember already the issue of their marriage is very disturbing. Although people, I mean the Britons don't want to talk about it because it's also another sticky thing. And because many people were even saying, why can't we have this crown passed on to the next generation to loop the king? But that's happening. But also this lady has been very focused. And she has been very active, but also very strong. She could look soft, but a very strong woman. And she also was so captivating, even in her speeches, whenever, of course, there were prepared text, whenever she could speak, but you would see that she's very knowledgeable. Remember, this woman who didn't go to university, as given the traditional education, but she has been very knowledgeable, but very intelligent and so articulate, which is not the same value that the son has, because the son has been a bit excluded, and he's trying to come up, but I think he will be able to catch up with that. I interacted with her, I think, twice when we had the Chogam in Malta, And also, I think when we had the Chogam here, because we were part of the team that were moving, and I also moved with the husband to Queen Elizabeth, because herself didn't go there for whatever reason. She didn't fly there, but went with the husband. But you do see, when she looked at you, you would be surprised that she even like she's reading you, and you'll be shocked when you are before. So that's why even our leaders, when they were before the Queen, they really felt small for this woman who has not gone to college, not gone very far, but very focused. Now, Africans were saying Queen Elizabeth presided over a church and a kingdom which was very exploitative to Africa, including the slave-trading, because that kingdom has benefited a lot from the slave-trading. You know, at one point, it was believed that Africans didn't have souls. So the Church of England allowed all the bad things to happen to the the slaves who came from Africa, including mutilating them, killing them as if they were sheep and goat. But because of her position, because of her articulation, because of her beauty, we seemed to have even forgotten all of that and moved on like life was normal. So these are some of the things. No wonder when these guys were put on a bus, I didn't have a lot of sympathy for them, but I sympathized with Africa, that were being treated like we are not part of this. And you remember at one point the Commonwealth, because now the Commonwealth is the biggest, I think, organization that we have when bring countries together other than the UN. But you realize that even within the Commonwealth, and Africa is the biggest contributor to the Commonwealth, but our position in the Commonwealth also, I think, need, like Bwana Otuko said, need to be discussed, need to be looked at. How do we belong to a group that was so strong, but at the same time we are so weak when it comes to decision making? But anyway, thank God that we had a person in the names of Queen Elizabeth who lived within. And in fact, when she became queen, she was in Africa. She was in Kenya here when the father died. So the following morning, she was a queen to be flown to England. But we also know that a lot could have happened if England and that kingdom took its right place in the history of this world and did good on what the bad things that have happened in Africa. We still have some cases. I think Kenya is still in court over the Mau Mau and the mutilation that happened there. But did we even become better after the kingdom left us? Of course, that's a discussion for another day. Bwana Otuko, what do you have on that?
Thank you. You've touched on a number of issues, but what comes into my mind is, for example, you're talking about our positioning in the Commonwealth. The first question I ask myself is, do we even need to belong to this organization? Of what benefit is it for us as African people?
Yeah.
I want to say that some of these organizations are neo-colonial organizations. They're organizations for reminding us how we are still inferior, how we are still dependent on them. Because in my view, we struggle to belong to the Commonwealth, but of what benefit is it? Apart from the annual gatherings and so on. Anyway, what economic benefit, what political benefit do we get apart from reminding us that we are still an inferior continent? We must belong there. And I think in my view as a Pan-Africanist, I do not think we need even to belong to some of these organizations, because they are simply for reminding us how we must depend on them, how we need to be suppressed. I would rather we have an alternative organization. If we wanted, as Africans, we can have an organization, for example, for the English-speaking countries in Africa. We can have an organization for the Arab-speaking organizations in Africa, so that we discuss African issues, other than going for these gatherings and you are reminded that we are still under the Queen. And I think I disagree that we should even fight for any space in Commonwealth. We rather abandon it and be able to form our own organizations. The other thing I want to state, beauty is not on the face of it. Beauty is in the character, and the character of the UK and the kingdom is seen in the practices of these people. What do they practice towards African people? We saw a video on, I think it was on a CNN video which was circulating, where the new king was greeting the white people. When it reached a black man, he did not touch his hand. He pretended that he didn't see him. The black man was struggling to show himself.
But was too black to be seen.
He was too black to be seen. This should remind us as Africa,
yes,
that irrespective of what happens, we shall remain Africans and we shall be treated the same way our forefathers were treated. We can only fight for our own space if we realize that we need a stronger Africa to create our own economic muscle, to create our own political path, and to ensure that we depend on each other rather than depending on the West. I gave you an example. We must study, irrespective of these challenges, other political challenges, we must study the economic strategy of the late Muammar Gaddafi. How was he able to support African countries by lending money? How was he able to generate this money locally? And I think these are things we must study so that we can be a better Africa. For example, why must Europe be against a pipeline that we know is going to employ over 50,000 Ugandans and Tanzanians? Why must we celebrate? I was looking at a political leader in this country celebrating that a pipeline has been suspended. That shows you the level of orientation that we have. This pipeline is not beneficial for the Europeans. It's beneficial for Ugandans, it's beneficial for Tanzania, sure, it's beneficial for African people. Why must the Western world be against the construction of a refinery? Who is this refinery going to benefit? Not Europeans. It's going to benefit our people in terms of jobs, in terms of economy, and these are things that Africa must rise up, wake up, and ensure that we must rethink, search ourselves, and be able to say, the West, we can only partner, but you cannot dictate what we need to do in Africa.
When we come back, we are going to look at the issues of the pipeline. Who is to benefit, who loses if it happens, and also going to look at issues of Africa and the relationship with the rest of the world, the conflicts that we're having in Africa and the rest of the world. And also going to look at a number of issues that really concern us as the black people, that in this dispensation of globalization. Thank you so much for following us, and we shall shortly after the break be back with some of those issues. Thank you. Don't go away.
Of the day on UBC.
If I'm looking at issues of taxation and all that, I will definitely run for the Kateshumbas. Okay? Okay. If I look at, if I'm looking at issues of investments and what, I would definitely run. I would definitely run for Dr. Emure Kugonza and Honorable Omara. Okay? If I'm looking at issues of the law, I will run for our very, very own people. I have the Oboso Bosses, I have the Katuntus, I have the Robin Arwakojos. So everyone is talented in one way or another.
Did you mention Katuntu?
Okay. Yes.
Is he yours?
Yes, he is.
Yours as in NRM?
He is.
Was brought to you by.
Simply make a small deposit of 99k and pay the balance mpola. You can pay in daily, weekly, or even monthly installments while you enjoy your new phone. So what are you doing today? Visit any MTN shop near you and get the MTN cupboard. That's super easy.
Effects of climate change are glaring. We have floods, landslides, drought, food insecurity. His Excellency the President has been very passionate about this, and he has explained the effect of destroying our natural resources, especially the wetlands, and cutting the forests. As Cabinet, as government, we have approved a 10 years restoration program we are going to provide alternative sources of livelihood. And the call is that people should leave the wetlands. And we have started from today evicting people from Lubiji wetlands. And we are going to roll out of the whole country. Our prayer is that those who have not yet been reached, please live peacefully. We are going to provide alternative source of livelihood as a government. Those who are still engaged in manufacturing and selling the plastic, especially the illegal non-buveras, we are going to close onto them. They are also a menace to our country. We look forward very soon having sodas back in the breakable bottles rather than the plastics which are being thrown all over at litter. I want to call upon Ugandans, let's conserve and let's use sustainably our natural resources. I thank you.
This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Water and Environment, Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, Uganda National Meteorological Authority, with support from Government of Uganda, Green Climate Fund, and the United Nations Development Programme.
It's Freaky Friday from Airtel. Buy or gift. Buy or give.
Get freaky too! Dial *149*10# to load a Freaky Friday bundle for you to enjoy the best offers on voice and data.
To buy a bundle for friends and family, dial *149*10*5#. Freaky Friday with Airtel. Buy or gift a bundle today. Dial *149*10# to get started. Airtel, the smartphone network.
Welcome back to this Pan-African Friday, and we thank you for being with us as we look at issues that actually affect we, the black people, and the black continent of Africa. Of course, Africa has more than the black people. We have the Arabs, we have, of course, some of them, I'm sure, don't believe that they're Africa. They will ask you, so you're also coming from Africa? And then you're like, but Tunisia is part of Africa. But anyway, that is what happens on this diverse continent of Africa. We're look at issues that definitely affect us as people of Africa and the African heritage and how we as African people can carry forward our agenda. When we went off for the break, we were looking at the issues of the pipeline and the politics of oil actually in the region, especially now in Africa and East Africa. But now, Tuko, you are talking about the alternative systems. When you look at the global systems, that the Africans need also to come up with alternative systems that can address our own issues, that can look at issues, and that can look at issues of Africa for the African people. We have parliaments now in Africa. We are having the East African Parliament. I think we have had recently the elections. The process for the elections of members of parliament, especially from Uganda, for the East African Parliament. We have the African Union. We have the African Parliament. Are these systems contributing to the aspirations of the African people? Or are we having these structures for purposes of looking like the rest of the world? I'll have your take on that, Takali.
I think I'd like to start in a roundabout way without answering that one very directly. We were talking about the issue of the East African crude oil pipeline. It is not by accident that the European Parliament would raise this matter at this time.
Yes.
It is also not by accident that the Dutch Foreign Ministry would talk about considering whether to increase or to maintain their support for IPOD. By the nature of dominance as a concept, and that is the path that white Anglo-Saxons have chosen for many, many years, whoever and whatever is in the way of that aspiration must be contained at any cost. It is also not by accident that President Biden has been talking rather stridently that should China seek to take over Taiwan by force, the weight of the United States military will be at their disposal. Imagine someone coming to your house and saying, the day you name your child, I will declare full war on you. Taiwan is a part of China. Whereas the politics dictate that they had their diversions years ago, and there are many people who fled there because of upheaval in China many years ago. And they have a semi-autonomous arrangement, but no one has ever disputed the fact that Taiwan is a part of China. They may be under a separate political arrangement, but they remain part of China. Now, why would the United States, none other than the president himself, say that the day you seek to take over what is yours, I will come calling?
But that has been happening even in the African context.
That is what I'm trying to say. I'm going roundabout to say, I started by saying that once upon a time, I used to be of that school of thought that talked about racism in terms of black and white. The approach of these nations, it's not personal. It's not even a black issue, by the way. Chinese are not black. And Putin is not black. It is an issue of controlling resources. It is an issue of who can offer what at what time. If at any one time, for example, for many years, Russia had been one of the top 2 suppliers of crude oil on the global scene, aside from Saudi Arabia. And I am willing to bet that the West has been looking for an opportunity to cut Russia down to size. Because remember that the oil economy, the world economy is lubricated by oil. Of course, there have been efforts for many years now to move away towards the green economy, but that will take many, many years. So to have Russia, who is their principal challenger for global dominance, having also the lion's share of say concerning what lubricates the world's tires, is not palatable in Western circles. So Putin made the mistake of a lifetime to actually play to what these people have wanted to do all along.
Exactly. That is, of course, the argument now.
Now coming back to the pipeline, President Museveni has shown that he can have a mind of his own. It is not a welcome concept in Western capitals. They have been tolerating him for many years now because they thought he will never be an economic factor. Now you want to run away with this oil thing and actually become a real player? That is not palatable. So they're talking about environmental causes, and yet this thing was extensively studied and treated in terms of, I don't know what they call it, environmental impact assessment. It has been done exhaustively and at every level. And by the time one of their own, which is Total, chooses to add itself to this equation, it has studied the fact that whatever is required to meet international standards in developing a pipeline in this day and age has been met. So why are you now coming up to say, no, it has not been met? Ndugu Mututa, I have to let you know that the West will not react unless you're getting to a place of becoming a real problem. They see that if Uganda has real money, given the grand ideas for transformation, they'll be out of business. It is not a welcome thing. That is why Ndugu Gaddafi was taken down. He had a mind of his own and a lot of oil and a lot of money. That is why Saddam was taken down. You know, Saddam began to make noises about getting the US dollar out of the equation and starting to use euros. They said, really? You want to overthrow the dollar? You will go first. Gaddafi began to make noises about reorienting the Africans, empowering them meaningfully to take their own course.
The African dollar.
They said, no, you have to go. This oil pipeline. They thought President Museveni would give up somewhere along the way. The man is maintaining his course. The man is gathering speed. Now there's now a timeline. They're saying 2025 to produce oil. They say no. He'll get to reach to control. That is the problem.
And now, for me, like we have always said, the problem is that it's not that what the West is thinking about Africa. My problem is, what is Africa thinking about itself? Because they will have to think anyway. They have to take decisions. They will do a lot of things. But
for their own good.
Exactly. But what is Africa doing about its own self? Because when you hear of Uganda human rights, Uganda environmental issues, are people sitting somewhere and taking these decisions alone? They are Ugandans who are lobbying for this to happen. Because the problem is, if it happens, maybe it is going to give the NRM a mileage, a political mileage, or it is going to give President Museveni a political mileage. But you realize that once that happens, again, because I'm sure even Saddam and Gaddafi had people who were coming from their countries to align themselves with the West. But when things went bad, I don't know what they're benefiting, or if they have benefited at all. It is unfortunate that, and we have talked about it here, that the resolution, the UN resolution to attack Gaddafi was endorsed by some of the African countries, including South Africa. So when you hear some of these rhetorics, the people are not just coming out from the blue. There are people who have been bribed within the Uganda population, within sometimes the Ugandan government, to align themselves with some of these people. But to me, that's not the biggest problem. But when they are talking about human rights, are they also thinking about the black people who are being killed on the streets of London, the streets of America, without a cause, and most of the European capitals? And for me, the problem is that...
Why should they? Are you one of us? Why should they?
You see?
It is you to care about your brothers.
Exactly. But Africans don't even care.
Well, we're short-sighted.
I think it's also a high time that, like Bwana Otuko said, that we get to the drawing board, to the discussion of what is the interest of Africa in the global world. How do we feel? What is our position in this global economy? What is our position in this global politics? Is it because we have allowed our countries to be divided so small that our presidents can be taken as smaller people down there, as commissioners who can be abandoned on a bus in a European capital? But these are some of the discussions that we need to look at as African people really. What is good for us? How do we position ourselves in a way that will help us to have an impact in the global politics? Is it because we have leaders who also go by the wave and forget that they are leaders? Because these are some of the things that definitely we need to look at. Because when we're talking about the environmental problems, we already have a pipeline which between, I think, Zambia and Tanzania, which was built a long time ago, and serving people along that corridor. And we have a lot of pipelines running elsewhere in Europe, from Russia to where to... don't they have environmental problems? But it is because, like you put it, that Uganda seems to be jumping the ship of the controlled and poor countries into something else, and this must not be allowed. But still, I've liked the spirit that the people of Africa, and mark this, you will not realize, you will see, not many countries will come to support President Museveni. At most, they will keep quiet, and they can only speak about it in boardrooms.
Except Tanzania.
Yeah, because for them they are affected. But the others will just talk about it somewhere and keep quiet. We are now in the UN. You do hear something coming up at the UN. But at the UN, they are talking about the normal things, the usual things, and sometimes you wonder whether it is also necessary, like he put it about the Commonwealth. They are talking about conflicts. But you know, some of these are the ripe areas for conflict. So I would expect that one of the African countries will come up and say, look, there's this problem. Why should we be harassed to this extent? But I mean, that is Africa for you. But now, Tuko, when you look at this issue of EALA, for example, do we have any hope in the EALA that in the future we are going to have a united East Africa and a politically united East Africa?
Thank you very much. When you're building a house, you begin from the foundation. And I think in Africa today, when you look at ECOWAS, when you look at the East African Community, the Pan-African Parliament, the AU, to me these are foundations. We have to put bricks into the foundation until it becomes a house. It may take a bit of time for Africa to realize the importance and the value of the East African Parliament, the Pan-African Parliament, and the AU. Why do I say so? Every time we begin an organization, the neo-colonialists will jump in. Most of the money that is in the East African community is coming from European Union.
Exactly.
Most of the projects run by African Union, are coming from the West. Unless and until we as Africans deal with the question of the economy, deal with the issue of money, where we can be able to have a pool of money as African people, that we shall be, for example, an African bank that will be lending money to the African projects in Africa, we shall still be controlled for some time. But I am happy that these organizations, these forums are existing. Why am I happy? Because they create a platform for discussion.
Sure.
They create a platform for reflection about today and the future that we want to have as Africa. The Pan-African Parliament and the East African Community, for example, if you look at the EALA, how it started and where it is now, we are slowly moving to the right direction. By the time we've been able to sign some of the agreements, we have also been able to have one uniform passport as East Africans. We are now talking about the one national ID, one identification card for all East Africans. It's something to appreciate about the strides the East African Community Parliament or East African Community Forum has been able to provide to the East African people. The AU, for example, for the first time after long years, have started issuing statements against the West on matters that are affecting African people, on matters that are happening in African people. We issue this statement. They may tend to be weak now because financially we are not strong, because you are issuing a statement against somebody who is funding you.
Yeah.
So you find that there is a limitation on that.
When the wording.
Yes, on the wording, and you have to carefully issue this statement. You have to carefully issue this statement. So the point I'm making is that until we reach such a point where Africa can strengthen its financial muscle, we shall not have the big audacity to be able to attack the West as we ought to be. But I think President Yoweri Museveni is one of those right thinkers in African continent that has consistently guided African Union, that has consistently guided all the African forums on what Africa needs to do if we are to transform and become better, independent and stable. We need to ensure that we deal with the issues of economy in terms of money. How do we transform Africa in terms of mindset and ideological orientation? Not to believe that we cannot exist without the West. Not to celebrate when an African country is attacked by the West. So I think President Yoweri Museveni is still very critical moving to that direction.
Sure. Where
Africa is supposed to go, I think he has understood it well, and he needs to continue speaking and be able to get many leaders oriented to believe not to be excited to be seated in a bus, not to be excited
surely
to be in the UN, because the question should be that African leaders must be asking themselves, of what benefit is the UN for us? If we, 54 countries plus, cannot even have a permanent seat in the United Nations.
Exactly.
So of what relevance are we to these organizations? So in other words, we are simply being held by the rope as sheep that are being taken to the grass, and I think African leaders must and should be able to get out of that kind of thinking and get to outside the box and see how to help Africa.
At one time, I was in New York for the UN, and I said, if I were an African leader, I wouldn't be coming back for the UN. For the simple reason was that people are moving in the hall. And you know, when you are in the UN, there's that UN village. There are no vehicles moving there, so you just walk from your hotel across into the UN for discussions. And then was the secretary, of the foreign secretary, Madame Hillary Clinton, who was arriving, and I could look at these leaders, the Arab leaders, the African leaders, and the North American leaders who were moving into the hall. And when this lady was arriving, there's what they call, the Americans call a freeze. Everyone has to stop for the VIP to pass. And these presidents were now being pushed like schoolboys, you know.
So the bus is not the first problem?
No, the bus is not a problem, and I don't know why. People are talking about the bus. A lot actually happened outside the camera. The bus has been an issue because the camera saw the bus, but many bad things happen to African leaders. And you know, these African leaders are being shuffled. Stop, freeze, that's the word. You have to stop for the
minister.
For the minister to pass with her convoy, then you can be allowed in. Then you are like, excuse me, why are we here in the first place? You see? So for me, I think Africa needs to redefine itself, and also even identifying the friends of Africa. Recently, when in Israel, and I still believed what Israel was raising was an issue. Israel is saying, of course, Uganda we are lobbying, and I think it happens that next year will be hosting the non-aligned movement, the NAM, for the countries that were really opposed to some of the things that we're talking about. Now, and the Russia, most of the NAM countries, including Africa, including Uganda, actually the majority in Africa, are always voting against Israel on the number of resolutions of the conflict. Now Israel was saying, but you look, you are talking about Russia, and most of the Africans are supporting Russia because it has been with them, much as they attacked Ukraine. For us, we are being attacked by Hamas. And when we respond, we are being condemned. And we think Africa is one of our biggest friends. Why are you not also supporting us in this thing? But you realize that Africa, I think we now need to realign our friends. Because some of the friends who have been living with have been parasitical. Our relationship with them has been more of parasitical, that they benefit from us more than we benefit from them. Last time we were here and I talked about this issue when we were talking about Russia. You remember I said, it is good that Russia is a friend of Africa. But are we not buying guns from Russia and other ammunitions that we use? Are we not getting other support from Russia in terms of building our capacities? But are we not buying food from there for the African? Thank God, I think Uganda, I was checking the records, we don't get much of the food from there. I think Kenya, next to us, gets more of the food from there. But so, if you are my neighbor, now you are supporting me buying your food, who is supporting the other? Then our relationship should be mutual. that we all stand to benefit and we stand to lose if this relationship does not work. So I think Africa will also need to look at that. Are we going to be a consumer society, and for how long? We have also issues of even the food that we are eating from the rest of the world, from the West, that Africa has the capacity to produce the best food that they can produce for themselves. But like Bwana Otuko said, these people may not allow you to do that, and you also stupidly fall in that the trap of not doing that. When you look at most of our people who are supposed to help us to go ahead are the people who either have been compromised or have been bribed to be agents of some of our enemies. So I think it is also a high time Africa looked from inward. The orientation, how are our leaders oriented? We may not have to have everyone coming to be a leader. We need to have leaders who have been oriented rightly to lead the people of Africa, because Africa is a group with unique disadvantages and unique problems as compared to the rest. Yesterday I saw someone introducing his husband when they were meeting with the President Biden. His husband? Yes, the man was introducing his husband. Now, for us in Africa, when you look at that, and you rightly laughed. Now, who told us Africans that when you marry a second wife or third wife, that is criminal? And when people can climb themselves like goats, and that is very okay. So this is, I think, some of the discussions that Africa needs to engage to see what is good as we are in this global world. Other one, if we don't do that, our culture. He was talking about the traditions during the burial of the Queen. You could have also seen some of the rams that were being brought for slaughter as they buried the Queen. And you know, the final burial is very private, most of the royal families. But behind the cameras, outside the cameras, a lot of things happen that are so traditional, that are more traditional than ours. But when it comes to Africa, then they will tell you that is not right, that is satanic, that is evil. But I think evil is all over the place. Now, talking about this issue of the iPod, again, what does that mean when you look at the future of politics in Africa, particularly in Uganda?
Well, I think we return to the same dilemma. Ndugo talked about Iyala not being in a position to talk very forcibly because the funding belongs elsewhere.
Exactly.
And the AU is not far behind. Most African economies are also in the same dilemma. How do you bite but not maim the person who enables you to be? But I think iPod is a similar situation. When it was formed in 2010, it received most of its funding from, part of it from the Dutch Foreign Ministry, and then also there is the Democratic Governance Facility. Those two foreign entities, European to be exact, and they have their own interests. One thing about the white man, he never loses track of his interests. He may smile, he may talk calmly, he may pretend to like you, but at the end of the day, should you cross the line, you will know where his interests lie. So when this facility was started, iPod that is, the impression was given that it was really to level the political ground, to boost governance issues, to enhance the general quality of social and political activity in this country. And I think we are now finding out that that has never been true. But I think by the time we are done talking here on this forum, for however long that we are able to do so, many more people will come to understand that the approach of the European and the American in particular, they're very consistent. We choose to see what we want to see, but they maintain their course, come rain or shine. They are not personal in terms of who they like and who they don't like. It's about whether you serve their interests or not. So it has been going on these 12 years. Now in the 12th year, they say, you know what? I think this thing is not working. Why did you say that 5 years ago? I'm not saying it's working, but why didn't you say that 5 years ago? And why didn't you say that 10 years ago? What we find out as we continue to engage with these people is that they're not afraid of being hypocritical. They're not afraid of changing their tune mid-journey, as long as they feel that you may not be the vehicle that will continue to guarantee their agenda. They will do away with you.
Sure.
Whether you say, I have been your friend for 30 years, you are talking about the Nana Line movement. And by the way, that is a very African thing. Talking about the reason I am at this party is because you're my friend. White men don't do that one. They're your friend if your interests converge. Whether they have known you 1,000 years, the day you take a different path, they'll forget everything you ever did. So the iPod arrangement, the democratic governance facility, was only good in as far as it continued to deliver the agenda. So it is always a crisis of interests that are endangered. So this is always a good time, like we have been saying, to examine what these vehicles serve us. Until this time, we have been really paying a lot of attention to ideals that have been crafted elsewhere, ideals that are communicated in such a way that they sound good, but it is a time to find out, are they really good? Whereas there is some good in there, we need to find out what percentage is good. Because if the good is 1% good, then you really do not need something that is 99% bad. These individuals or these people or these systems are going around and around, and that is their typical practice. They claim the issue is this, but if you look closely, you'll find out the real issue is that what they have been forcing on you, you have refused. And once you refuse, their voices will get louder and louder until it reaches a point of either no return or outright conflict. So the iPod situation, going forward, must be examined to see to what degree is it good for us. Let us change direction for once. It has been good, or the concept is good, for the crafters. Many of them are in Brussels, others are in London. When will it be crafted and be a good thing for people who are sitting in Kampala and in Kotido, in Lira and in Arua? That is the question.
If we have a functional parliament, if we have a functional, we have a parliament, not we, if we have the judiciary, we have the government operating, do we need IPO? Even if it doesn't exist?
Well, they're saying there are gaps.
Well, I think the answer could be yes and no. Yes, why? Because even if it's not an iPod funded by the Europeans, as a country we need a forum where people who don't agree in terms of ideologies can be able to have a discussion on what the type of country that we need and where we should go as a country. Ideally, for me, I think the forum, having a forum is a good idea. The no comes from the fact that what are the interests of those that are funding such a forum? Because they are realizing that what they wanted to push through such a forum may not be achievable, so they can be able to withdraw this money. But we should also be cognizant of the fact that most economies in the world are struggling. Could it be that they are struggling in the economy?
Back at home.
Back at home, and they are pulling out because they do not have the money? That's something to look into. But I think having the forum is a good idea, where we brainstorm those who don't agree with us, who are in government, and those that agree can be able to meet, look into policy issues, raise these matters before they go to Parliament. If you check iPod carefully, you actually realize that the the discussions at IPOD are basically by political parties that are in parliament, but the people who participate in IPOD meetings are mainly political leaders, the leaders of political parties. Today, and in my view, I think it's a good thing that if there are policy issues that need to be agreed upon, such a forum would be able to reflect on them before they sail into their MPs as they go into parliament.
Yeah, but
that has not been the case.
But
that has not been the case. It's been a forum for fellowship.
Exactly.
For meet and greet, and not necessarily discussing critical issues that affect the people. It has been a forum for negotiation for power. If I sat in that, and I've been sitting in that when I was still working in Plot 10. I got opportunity to be able to participate in some of these IPOD meetings. The thinking of those that don't agree with NRM is that in the original thinking, they thought it's an opportunity to negotiate for some power sharing deal or something of the sort.
For deal cutting.
Or for deal cutting. Alternatively, how much we can be able to get.
But at the same time,
yes.
even if it were so, which would have been okay, if you cannot meet somewhere in a bar or somewhere to cut our deals, and you can meet here and sanitize our deals, it will be okay. My other thinking, and of course everyone thinking, is it's like, do we need someone to give us money to be able to sit down to do that?
Of course, the answer is no. The answer is no.
Yeah, because the one who is going to give you money would be interested in the outcome.
Exactly.
So if we are to avoid all this, I think it has not been fair. We have not been fair to ourselves actually by having some of this funding, because someone will then be very interested to even draft the agenda. That as you are going to sit, you'll be talking about this, but this agenda is not taking us very far. And I think in his wisdom, President Museveni has been avoiding some of these meetings, not because he doesn't believe that what they're discussing could be beneficial to the country, but the weight of what outcome is going to affect the country, like you have put it. Some of the things have not been really not the best of our country. So the iPod still could be going on without someone who's funding. I mean, you need money for what? A lot for what? Sitting and
in order to meet and have a discussion.
Yes.
Of course, the main issue is that there is a money aspect in it.
Exactly.
Where political parties that participate get some money through Electoral Commission, and they file returns at the end of every financial year. But I think I want to agree with President Museveni's opinion when he was having a discussion with IPOD, where he said, I think going forward, Uganda should be able to look for this money.
Exactly.
Why should we be able to rely on the Europeans? Because we do not know what their interests are.
Exactly.
We can maintain the platform, but whatever minimal amount of money that
should be our own money.
Yes,
I agree with you on
money
that.
To strengthen democratization.
Because talking about orientation again of the African leaders, the type of we have had most of the economies that have stood, including China, Russia, and which other country. Leaders are trained either through the normal, and recently when I was in Israel, I saw that, the normal the youth service. People are picked at a younger age, they are trained sometimes through the army, and by the time they are of age to lead, at least they have what it takes to be a leader of a country. Now, in Africa, we are very blessed, but sometimes we could also be very unlucky. That any person can wake up from anywhere and you find him tomorrow as a leader. And to me, that's a bit unfortunate, because then you may not know what it entails to be a leader per se at that time. And some of these problems we have been having of bribing African leaders to even selling their own people. We have been talking about the chiefs in the past, that chiefs were selling people who were taken into slave trade, but maybe that trade has not stopped up to today. We still have people who are being sold. Yes, they had someone on TV, people talking of when our girls, and last time when we were the free trade conference in Tanzania, this lady, the former president of Banda, Joyce Banda of Malawi, raised it, said, we are, as Africa, losing a lot of potential in terms of the young men and the young women who are leaving this continent to go look for greener pastures. Many of them are dying on waters as they try to cross the seas. Others are being taken to the Arab world and are brought back either dead or without kidneys or something like that. So this is part of the default within the African systems. Because if we don't stop that, then in the future, and as of today, Africa is the youngest continent. So the youngest population of the youngest continent is being wiped out, either technically or intentionally, for us, and the African leaders are supervising over that. So when we look at some of these things, until that time when the African continent leaders will come up to say, I think enough is enough, and we have to do this. And you are looking at, like he put it, that we are looking at some of these systems, the foundations that we are building may be taking longer to achieve some of these things. So what Africa needs to do, there are two things that we need to do. People are talking of the human rights. But when you look at some of these countries' record of human rights before they came where they are today, it's despicable. And when you look at their paths even to development, has been riddled with blood. But Africa, we are moving into two dimensions. First of all, we have to catch up on development, but also issues of governance, issues of human rights, even the issues of we're talking about leaders, the sensible and responsible leaders coming up there. But now, is it, okay, let's roughly talk about Uganda. Is your NRM human rights record that bad that it can even affect the drilling of oil from the ground?
Thank you very much. What may be a human right to the European may not be a human right in Africa, because we vary in terms of values and practices.
Because they are talking of universal human rights.
We do not have anything called universal. There are things, there are very few things that may look universal. But Africa is very peculiar in its own way. And for example, when we were being raised up, being beaten by a father, it was normal. It was a corrective measure. But to the European, even touching a child or pinching is against the rights of the young child. And that shows you the variation in terms of practices by the two communities. But what I want to say is that before I answer the question of whether our human rights record is very bad, you touched an element of the National Youth Service from the country that you visited. I was very glad to participate in one of the meetings where there was a discussion in this country by Ministry of Presidency together with the Ministry of National Guidance, ICT and National Guidance, discussing about introduction of a new policy called National Youth Service. So they are at an advanced level by both Ministry of Presidency and the Ministry of ICT. Honorable Baremos has been highly participating in the idea of the introduction of the National Youth Service. To me, I think that's a good thing, because you're going to have a certain elitist class being reoriented in terms of what duty they have to their country and ensuring. However, that will not solve our problem. It may solve 10–15% of our problem. Why? Because a majority of the population in Uganda is not at school. Because when you look at the National Youth Service policy, is mainly targeting those in high institutions of learning or in institutions of learning. My idea is that the day we abandoned the mass orientation of people, what they call chakamchaka, was the beginning of our problem. If you look at the performance of NRM from 1986 to 96, the 10 years, when it was the movement system, where people were being oriented on what duty they have, irrespective of whether they went to school or not. Because if you came to Uganda, you would find tutors of NRM teaching ideology, translating the NRM mission ideology and 10 points program in Uganda. And if you went to Teso, it was the same. In Acholi, it was the same. And there was a common thinking by the people. The thinking that we had a duty and calling to serve Uganda, irrespective whether you're a farmer, whether you're a trader, whether you're a leader, or whether you're a preacher. Everyone was conscious about our duty as a people to develop Uganda and to take it to another level. And when you look at the strength at which the economy grew at that time, you actually realize that even corruption was very minimal at that time. Beyond to 1996, when the West started pressing Uganda and President Yoweri Museveni to abandon the mass orientation program, what they call the militarization. But you have been in Israel, these things are done. You have been in the US, they are doing the orientation. But to Uganda, because they realized that we are going to raise a conscious population that cannot be manipulated, they had to ensure that they use resources. That takes us back to money. That if you want us to give you money for doing this project, abandon the mass orientation. And the moment we accepted to abandon the mass orientation of our people, we actually digressed from the original path that the 10-point program was taking us. That's why you realize that today, the quality human resources that we have are actually in the military. The orientation in the military has continued, and it is steadfast, and that's why you find that today the elites and all those that belong to the UPDF are actually better citizens in this country than the civilian population. Why? Because with the civilian population, as soon as we abandoned the orientation, the ideological orientation, everyone was on his own. We were now watching the televisions of the West and thinking that what they were telling us about our country was the best information that we could get. I can assure you that if you went to any country in Africa, I cannot deny that we may not have issues of human rights challenges. We may be having them. But I do not think we have reached a point where we have completely degenerated as a country to that level where they can call us and say we do not understand what we are doing. In my view, all of these so-called human rights is an attempt to endear the population against the ideals of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who is, for example, focused. We have just talked about the East African Community pipeline. If you looked at the advantages of the pipeline, they supersede the challenges they could be raising. Where in the world is there a pipeline and we have not experienced environmental challenges? Is it in the US? Is it in the UK, where there are no challenges? We have seen, even in China, the pipeline challenges in the sea, the pipeline busting. Have they addressed those challenges before they lecture us as Ugandans and Africans on whether they care about the environment more than us that live here? So I think the issue is not about the human rights. They are only using it as a scheme, as an opportunity to suppress projects that can be able to develop Africa to the next level.
When you look at, again, because the fingers being pointed, of course, talking about the orientation of leaders, especially in the UPDF, as having definitely the biggest bulk of leaders who actually have gone through orientation and they know what it means to be in a country, to have a country, and to lead a country. But of course, again, the same groups seem to point fingers mainly at the UPDF and also the police for some of these human rights they're talking about. But also, I think, like it is being said, that these human rights are beyond, is a curtain for people to do a lot of things behind the veil of the human rights, that people are saying, no, the problem is human rights. But when you go down the nitty-gritties, you find that some of the countries that are advancing this argument of the human rights are not even better back at home when it comes to the records of the human rights. If we subject their practices to the African lens, you will find it's a lot that is also happening behind there. Now, when you look at the future of Africa in the global context, especially when it comes to some of these rights and our engagements in making sure that the African agenda is also articulated, what are you looking at, Takali?
I think it goes back to what Ndugotuke has talked about rather expansively. And if we don't resolve the issue of generating our own resources, control of our own resources, and of course, deciding our own values. One of the things that I've been looking forward to, and I still am, is to see where Ndugu Mao goes from here. He has said at various opportunities that one of the things that he has high on his agenda is actually pushing the issue of a national dialogue. One of the things that I've said many times is that one of the crises in terms of governance and political issues on this continent is that we have never sat down to reach a consensus concerning how we want our societies governed. We have never even reached a consensus concerning what our values are. You know, having been subjected to colonial leadership for many, many years, some of the values that we readily say are ours are not ours. But because in our own lifetime, we have always seen this as part and parcel of our existence, we no longer even can readily say, this one was brought in 1954 from Holland, that one was brought from in 1922 from India, and so on and so forth. So I'm thinking the starting place is to actually isolate our own values, our own aspirations, our own interests, which have become dangerously intertwined with the interests of others. If you don't know who you are or what you're looking for, someone will definitely offer that, and it will not be to your benefit either. What such a forum would do, if in fact that idea takes off, is to actually bring these divergent points of view to a common place and to actually decide which one of those should make up the Uganda that we want and the Uganda that we have envisaged going forward. Because really and truly, even the people who disagree remain Ugandans. So we want to see, or we should be able to see, whether these are things, and a dialogue must not be a political affair. The moment we bring the political considerations into the dialogue, it will collapse. It must be that the things that we're espousing are more than our religious interests, more than our political affiliations, more than our educational statuses and so on. It is basically what would be good for any human being is really what we should be talking.
Exactly, and part of the problem is that how do we identify something which is good for us as Africans? We have had a number of people, students who have gone to Europe, who have gone to US, who have gone everywhere in this globe to look for education. But I think something that we have missed, we have not been as strategic and focused as Chinese.
No.
Because when the Chinese send a student to America, they are going to tell him, you go and study this type of thing, this car. And when you come back, you'll get the same car, tear it down and look at its parts and fabricate something similar to that car, and it will be a Chinese car. They did that with the technology in guns. They say you have all the hardware and let's tear it down and we build ours similar or even better than theirs. Now for us, most of the problems we're having in Africa are the people who have gone to Europe and other countries and come back to Africa. These are have now become agents of the West. And that's the worst. And when you talk of the problems that we have been having in Africa, these are the people who have studied, but when they come here, they are followed up and used to have professors who are being used by the West to have. He talked of people who are out of school, a big number of Ugandans who are in school who may not benefit if we start the National Youth Service. But the other comfort is that maybe the leaders who are looking at in the future could be coming from some of these people that will be going through the training. But again, we need also to think about the other population that is left there. But definitely Africa, not only Uganda per se, we need to have a leadership that is focused, a leadership that is responsible, and a leadership that is responsive to the aspirations of our people. Now, if you don't do that, someone will come and tell us do this, and we'll do it. And you know what the experience we have had with this, most of these adjustments that we have had from the World Bank, from IMF. You begin something, then along the way you find it does not work, and does not work for Africa. And then you cannot reverse because you have already moved. And there's a discussion which I think next week or the other week we shall be having, is that even food, how can we rely on the rest of the world, the West specifically, to provide Africa with food, with all the fertile soils that we have, with the younger population that we have? Why? So as Africans, I think there is now need to engage beyond the iPod of Uganda. Can we have a similar iPod of Africa, that African leaders can sit and engage and come up with something that will be able to help us really move Africa? For example, you are moving from Uganda going to Nigeria. Now, when you look at the path, how you get there, you're either going to fly to Addis Ababa, you might even end up flying to Paris, or you might end up flying to Heathrow and fly back to Nigeria. So if we are talking of intra-trade in Africa, that is something that was also addressed during the free trade area, and you don't have a road crossing from Uganda going to Burundi, you don't have a road crossing to Congo, then how are you going to be trading? You can't. So there is a lot that happens both in terms of hardware, but also in terms of software, the thinking. Because part of this is our thinking. Can we have the road that has been waited for long from South Africa to Alexandria? Can we have an African airline, let alone Uganda Airlines, South African Airlines, Tanzania Airlines? But we are not within us. We are not, because once we go to Uganda Airline, I think most of the most lucrative paths that we want to fly was either going to Dubai, going to London, going to America. But can we, for purposes of Pan-Africanism, have within Africa where we can move and you trade with an African country? Otherwise, if we don't know that, if we can't trade, we are not relating, then still someone will be coming in and doing all these things. So I think the biggest problem of Africa is not because the rest of the world is against us. The biggest problem of Africa is because we are not for ourselves. Now, as long as we don't learn how to work within ourselves, but we have to rely on someone to come and address our issues in Uganda or Africa, I think that's where the problem is. Now, I think I'll go back to Ndugu Otuko. Of course, we have moved away, NRM has moved away from a lot of things, including the 10-point program and many things that were, as the party has been moving, but also the global politics, the regional politics, a lot has come in. And what we need to look at now is the future of the politics of Uganda. Can we have a situation where the the politics in Uganda can have the same interest with politics in Tanzania and the same things with the politics of the rest of the East African countries. More so, as we talk of now having one political entity, but with countries like Sudan still very far off in terms of organization.
Elections.
Sorry, thank you. It is possible. It is possible, but it may not be now. It is work in progress. Why am I saying so? You've mentioned countries like Sudan, DR Congo, Somalia is coming on board. But in itself, the creation of this forum is creating a path to that direction. The stability of Congo will continue improving because of its membership to the East African community. We have seen the recent instability in the Eastern DRC. It became an East African problem. The East African heads of state had to come together because they have a forum.
Sure.
And a resolution was made that now we are working towards building an East African standby force. The East African standby force will be relevant in solving the instabilities within the member countries. It may look theoretical, but in my view, that's the direction to move. We know that His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president of Kenya, has been pivotal in ensuring that countries contribute the military, human resources and equipment towards the deployment in the instability in Eastern DRC, because Eastern DRC may not have the capacity now. But because of its membership, the East African community, the DRC problem is an East African problem,
sure.
Both economically and politically. Because we all know that the Eastern DRC has been part of the regions that have been harboring rebels or individuals that are anti-several governments. It's not only necessarily Uganda, it's also Rwanda. We also know in South Sudan, they're also having people.
Even the Al-Shabaab.
Even the Al-Shabaab has been in Eastern DRC. The point I'm making is that the forum is very good because it is providing us an opportunity, a platform for building a consensus towards a stable East African region. And I want to attest here that for the time that East African community has been moving to that direction, of course we know that many interests are not happy about this. They have been trying to infiltrate some East African members to try and disorganize the community, but I believe the bigger majority are being able. And I was very happy with President Yoweri Museveni when they introduced the idea that if there is a project, for example, that all members cannot be able to buy into, the willing, the coalition of the willing should be able to go ahead and be able to build this project. The East African pipeline, for example, may not be a consensus in all the member countries, but it's a consensus between Uganda and Tanzania, and the project will be able to move on. So I think, in my view, we may not be able to have a common consensus now, but there will be pockets of consensus within the member countries, and we shall build to the bigger consensus in the future.
As we wind up, Takali, how do you look at the future of East Africa as a country?
I think that we have reached a point where there is a consensus that the greater good, and which means that the bigger numbers that the community has to offer, are a superior arrangement to the individual states. We know that when this arrangement collapsed back in 1977, and cited among the key reasons was political differences, there was also lack of participation from the private sector, civil society, among other grievances. There were, among other things, there were some nations that were saying there was the distribution of resources was not equitable. It was along the lines of who was developed more than the other, and so on and so forth. But in '84, other stakeholders came to the conclusion that this thing needs to be revisited. It was not so well put together, but the benefits could be more than we have anticipated if we put our hands to the work. Okay. It culminated, of course, to the resurrection of this present arrangement in 2000, and we've been holding steady ever since. Uganda, for a fact, has increased in its own participation in the community, and it's one of the leading markets for our goods. So the future is to really refine how we are going to do this going forward. It is no longer a question of should we. It is a question of we must, but exactly how is the only question.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for the time being you have been with us. And also thank you so much our viewers who have been following us on the different platforms for this time you have been with us. I know it has been a very long time when we missed each other, and this time we are back, and we can assure you we are now back completely, because most of the things that have been keeping people away are now done. We soon shall be joined by colleagues Mazima Cole and Jagenda Endtime, and they'll be back with us in studio here. Nduguru Garama has disappeared, so whoever sees him actually should bring him live to us, because I don't know what has happened to Nduguru Garama, but I know he's also very busy. So our viewers, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the studio team that have been behind the cameras, our producers and our cameramen and all the floor members. Thank you so much for the show. And we will be back with you on Friday. And trust us, on Friday we shall come back with hot discussions, and then we shall also want your participation next week. Thank you so much. Until then, have a good time.